It started with a moment so small, most people would have missed it. A calm voice, a steady face, and a single statement that seemed harmless until the room went quiet. Lydia Plath, the daughter who had spent years being the family's peacekeeper, finally spoke. Not in anger, not in rebellion, but in truth. And somehow that quiet truth was louder than anything her family had ever said on camera. Hi friends, I'm Sophie, and welcome back to Sister Wives, Chapter, and Reality Scandals Daily. If you love honest commentary on the real stories behind reality TV families, make sure you're subscribed. Tap that bell and share your thoughts in the comments, because today we're talking about something real. What happens when the quiet one finally speaks and the entire system of control starts to shake? If you've followed Welcome to Plathville since the beginning, you already know Lydia, the prayerful daughter, the one who stayed behind when her siblings left, the one who defended her parents even when their rules crushed her freedom. For seasons, Lydia was portrayed as the good one, obedient, loyal, and deeply devoted to her family's faith. She wasn't out chasing dreams like Mariah or fighting for independence like Ethan. Lydia stayed home, praying for everyone else to find peace while she quietly carried the emotional weight of the entire household. But in season 6, something shifted. The tone in Lydia's voice changed. When she finally spoke about her wedding plans, her faith, and the criticism that followed, it was no longer the soft agreement her parents expected. It was composure with conviction. Viewers could see it. Kim's posture stiffened. Barry's face went still. The family's usual balance, that carefully rehearsed calm, cracked for a split second. It was like everyone in that room realized the person they'd counted on to stay silent had found her strength. For years, the Plath parents, especially Kim, had held on to control through what they called family discussions. Those moments often felt more like subtle interrogations than real conversations. Each child's choices became public within the family, and gossip wasn't just tolerated, it was normalized. That's how control survived. No one confronted Kim directly. They talked around her, about her, or through her. Lydia, out of love and loyalty, stayed quiet through it all. That's what made her words hit so hard this time. Lydia didn't raise her voice. She didn't accuse anyone. She simply told the truth about how she felt, how gossip had torn through her family, how her faith wasn't about rules or image, but about love. And in that moment, the Plath family's system of silence began to crumble. Kim's face said everything. You could see the discomfort, the loss of authority, that rare flash of vulnerability from a woman who built her world around control. Barry, as usual, stayed composed, but even he seemed to recognize the weight of what just happened. Lydia's tone wasn't rebellious, it was free. It was the kind of peace that can't be managed or directed by someone else. Fans immediately picked up on it. Social media lit up with reactions. "Lydia's finally finding her voice," one viewer wrote. "That girl has more grace than anyone gives her credit for." It wasn't a scream for attention. It was the quietest rebellion possible. And maybe that's why it shook everyone so deeply. So as we look at this moment, the question isn't just what Lydia said, it's what her truth exposed. Can a family built on silence survive honesty? Can love exist when control is mistaken for protection? That's what we're going to explore today, because when the quiet one finally speaks, the truth doesn't just echo, it breaks everything open. To really understand why Lydia's words mattered so much, we have to go back to where all of this started. Inside that carefully constructed world Kim and Barry Plath built for their 9 children. For years, their household operated under one core belief: control kept the family safe. But that control came wrapped in rules so tight, even love had conditions. From the first seasons of Welcome to Plathville, the Plath home was presented as a world apart. No internet, no pop music, no smartphones. The kids weren't allowed to watch mainstream TV or hang out freely with friends outside their community. Kim often described these choices as acts of protection, shielding her children from what she saw as the dangers of modern culture. And Barry, soft-spoken but firm, supported her vision. Together, they built an environment that looked peaceful from the outside. But inside, viewers started to notice something else. An undercurrent of fear, of walking on eggshells, of children learning to smile through quiet tension. Kim's control wasn't always loud. It showed up in the smallest moments, like when Mariah wanted to pursue her music and Kim called her songs too worldly. Or when Ethan and Olivia's marriage began to show cracks, and Kim subtly questioned Olivia's influence over her son. These weren't just disagreements, they were power checks. Every family conversation seemed to circle back to who was following the rules and who wasn't. And then there was Lydia, so different from her siblings. While Mariah rebelled and Micah sought independence, Lydia stayed. She worked hard, prayed harder, and absorbed the emotional chaos around her. For Kim, Lydia became proof that the family's way worked. She was the model daughter, the one who didn't question, didn't push, didn't leave. But what the show captured over the seasons was that Lydia's obedience came at a cost. She wasn't just following the rules. She was carrying the burden of everyone else's pain. In many episodes, we'd see Lydia tucked away in her prayer closet, whispering prayers for her family's unity. She cried not out of rebellion, but out of heartbreak. She watched her siblings move out, clash with their parents, and struggle to define themselves. Yet even then, Lydia defended her parents publicly. She believed that loyalty would heal everything, that silence, patience, and prayer could keep the family together. But under the surface, something else was happening. Gossip had quietly replaced communication. When Kim felt slighted, she didn't confront directly. She discussed it with others. When siblings disagreed, they whispered in corners, trying to guess who said what, who was loyal, who was drifting. It was a cycle that kept everyone guessing and no one grounded. Instead of solving problems, family discussions became stages for moral lectures. People weren't heard. They were corrected. In one episode, Mariah confided that she felt constantly judged. Kim's response was calm but loaded. She said she was only concerned. That word, concern, became a kind of code. It meant you were being watched, monitored, maybe even talked about later. That atmosphere of spiritual correctness made it nearly impossible for anyone to express how they really felt. Barry, for his part, often stood on the sidelines. He'd nod, remind everyone of their blessings, and hope peace would return. But his quietness enabled Kim's control to grow unchecked. Even when he disagreed, it rarely showed on camera. The unspoken rule was clear. Don't challenge Kim, and don't question the system. Over time, viewers could see how this shaped the children. Mariah's loud rebellion was a response to suffocation. Micah's independence was escape, disguised as confidence. Ethan's distance was a wall of self-preservation. And Lydia, she stayed, convinced that being good enough, obedient enough, faithful enough might hold everything together. That's why her recent statement landed like an earthquake. It wasn't just a comment. It was a breach in the family's entire communication system. When Lydia spoke out, she did something no one else in that household had ever done, without punishment or backlash. She told the truth without anger. She broke the cycle, without breaking herself. The Plath family's structure thrived on whispers, on who was right, who was wrong, who had strayed. Lydia's words cut straight through that noise. For the first time, there were no whispers, just honesty. And that honesty, delivered calmly by the one person everyone thought would never rebel, became the most radical act of all. In a family where gossip was control, truth became rebellion. And Lydia, the girl who once prayed for peace in silence, found the courage to speak the kind of truth that no one could spin, correct, or manage. There was a time when Lydia Plath believed silence was the purest form of strength. In a family where rebellion was branded as betrayal, Lydia found refuge in prayer, patience, and obedience. When her siblings stormed out, shouted back, or shut down, Lydia folded her hands and bowed her head. To outsiders, she seemed peaceful, serene even. But the truth, the one quietly unraveling behind those closed bedroom doors, was that Lydia's silence wasn't peace, it was survival. We saw it time and time again on Welcome to Plathville. The camera would pan to Lydia in her small prayer closet, a narrow, dim space lined with sticky notes and Bible verses. It was her sanctuary, her confessional, her therapy session in a house where therapy itself was never mentioned. She'd pray for her mother, for her siblings, for unity. Always unity. Her whispered words felt heavier than her years, like she was carrying the spiritual weight of an entire collapsing family on her shoulders. In those moments, Lydia wasn't just praying to God, she was negotiating with him, pleading for calm, for reconciliation, for her mother's anger to soften, for her siblings' hearts to return home. When she spoke, it was always in the language of faith. God will heal us. God will bring us back together. But beneath that hope was fear. Fear of what might happen if she stopped praying. Fear that without her vigilance, everything would crumble completely. And in a way, it did. As Kim's control tightened and the older kids slipped away, Ethan estranged, Mariah defiant, Micah gone, Lydia became what every parent in that house relied on, the anchor. For Kim, Lydia was proof that her parenting still worked. For Barry, she was the calm amid chaos. For the younger siblings, she was the comforting constant, the one who stayed when everyone else left. That loyalty became Lydia's identity. She wasn't just the obedient daughter, she was the glue holding the story together. But that glue came at a cost. The show captured it in glimpses. Lydia's journal entries, the moments where her voice cracked in confessional interviews, when she said she wished she could do more to fix things. You could hear the weight in those words. Lydia wasn't just mourning her family's fracture, she was blaming herself for it. Somewhere along the way, she internalized a lie, that peace was her personal responsibility, that if she just loved enough, prayed enough, stayed quiet enough, she could mend what her parents broke. Her silence became a shield. When tension flared between Kim and Mariah, Lydia absorbed the emotional fallout, offering forgiveness before anyone asked for it. When Barry looked defeated, she smiled wider, assuring him everything would be okay. And when Kim cried about being misunderstood, Lydia comforted her, even if that meant burying her own feelings in the process. That's what makes Lydia's story so haunting. She learned that her voice, her real emotional voice, could cause conflict. So she trained herself to speak softly, to soothe, to comply. It was the only way to stay safe in a house where truth was treated like rebellion. Silence, for Lydia, was both armor and prison. Psychologically, this is a pattern often seen in families ruled by control. One child becomes the emotional caretaker, the peacekeeper, They take on everyone else's pain and make it their purpose to fix it. Lydia filled that role perfectly. She was the emotional sponge, absorbing guilt, fear, and tension so that others didn't have to face it. In doing so, she kept the family from exploding, but she also kept herself from living freely. Even the way she talked about her faith reflected this duality. When Lydia prayed, she wasn't just seeking God's guidance, she was asking permission to feel. Her diary entries often contained phrases like, "I want to make everyone proud," or, "I know God has a reason for this pain." She turned her suffering into duty, because that's what she was taught love looked like. And Kim reinforced it, constantly praising Lydia's purity, her selflessness, her heart for the family. But that praise wasn't unconditional love. It was emotional reinforcement. Every compliment came with a subtle expectation. Stay this way. Stay obedient. Stay quiet. Stay good. Because if Lydia ever stopped, Kim would lose her last piece of control. Meanwhile, Lydia watched her siblings escape. Mariah found music and independence, but at the cost of family ties. Micah built a life of freedom, but distanced himself from faith. Ethan struggled to balance marriage and estrangement. And through it all, Lydia stayed behind, clutching her Bible and believing that endurance made her strong. In truth, it made her invisible. Lydia's silence kept her safe, yes, but it also kept her small. The more she tried to be the perfect daughter, the more she disappeared in everyone else's story. And that's what makes her recent moment of honesty so powerful. When she finally spoke, she wasn't just breaking silence for the first time. She was reclaiming herself from years of emotional conditioning. For Lydia, survival once meant submission. Now, survival means honesty. The girl who once believed that peace required silence is realizing that peace might actually require the opposite. Speaking out, even when it shakes the foundation of everything she's been told to protect. There comes a moment in every story where the quiet one stops apologizing for existing. For Lydia Plath, that moment arrived not with rage or rebellion, but with clarity. It was the moment she looked directly at the same people who once taught her silence and chose to speak, not to wound, but to free herself. What played out in recent Welcome to Plathville episodes, and quietly echoed through her social media posts, felt less like reality TV and more like a reckoning. For years, fans watched Lydia exist in the margins of her family's chaos, holding prayer meetings while her siblings escaped one by one. But now, she's standing center stage, no longer the peacemaker trapped between two worlds, but the witness testifying to her own truth. It started when gossip began to swirl about her engagement and upcoming wedding. Whispers that she'd followed too closely in Kim's footsteps, that her faith was controlling, that she was naive, that she was repeating her parents' mistakes. The same public that once pitied her for her obedience now turned critical, dissecting every post, every word, every choice. And for a while, Lydia stayed silent, just as she always had. But then, in a moment that shocked both fans and family, she broke that silence. She didn't lash out. She didn't argue. Instead, she spoke with the calm precision of someone who had finally learned that truth doesn't need volume to be powerful. "I know who I am," she said in one of her recent posts, her words grounded, not defensive. "My relationship with God isn't about rules. It's about love. And love isn't control." That single sentence landed like a thunderclap across both sides of her fractured family. For Kim, it must have felt like a mirror, one held up gently, but firmly. Because Lydia wasn't attacking her mother's faith. She was redefining it. She was drawing a line between devotion and domination, between belief and bondage. In one of the latest Welcome to Plathville episodes, the tension was almost visible in the air. Lydia, sitting across from her parents, tried to explain that her choices, her marriage, her faith, her independence, were her own. Kim's smile was tight, her tone syrupy, her questions sharp. She asked if Lydia was being wise, or if she was being led astray. It was classic Kim. Control disguised as concern. But Lydia didn't crumble. She didn't rush to reassure, didn't shrink. She simply said, "I'm at peace with what God has shown me." That line was more than a statement. It was a verdict. Barry, ever the quiet one, looked torn. You could see the discomfort etched into his expression. He wasn't angry. He was unsettled. Lydia's calm confidence shattered his long-held belief that obedience was the path to harmony. For decades, Barry had kept peace by staying quiet. Now his daughter was keeping peace by doing the opposite, by speaking truth, even when it was uncomfortable. That scene felt like a courtroom without the robes or gavels. A moral trial, decades in the making. Kim's authority was the defendant. Lydia was the witness. And the truth, finally, was the evidence no one could dismiss. In that courtroom, Lydia didn't accuse or condemn. She simply testified to her own freedom. She didn't need to prove her worth or justify her choices. Her measured tone, the calm, unwavering cadence that once served to appease, now carried a new weight. It was the sound of someone who had learned that peace without honesty is just another kind of prison. Fans noticed too. Social media lit up with comments like, "Lydia finally found her voice," and "She's not her mum, she's breaking the cycle." Others remarked on how her faith, once seen as submission, now looked like strength. And that's what makes this chapter so profound. Lydia didn't abandon her beliefs to find herself. She redefined them. Faith in the Plath world had always been a weapon of control, a means of silencing dissent and rewarding obedience. But for Lydia, it became the opposite, a source of liberation. She used the same scripture her mother once wielded to justify control, but with new meaning. When she said, "Perfect love casts out fear," she wasn't quoting doctrine. She was describing her transformation. Kim's version of faith demanded purity and punishment. Lydia's version offered grace. Kim's love came with conditions. Lydia's came with freedom. And for a family built on hierarchy, that shift was seismic. In one of her most recent posts, Lydia wrote, "I've learned that peace doesn't always mean quiet. Sometimes peace means speaking truth and trusting that love can handle it." That line captures the essence of this entire evolution. Because in the end, Lydia didn't fight her family. She didn't expose them. She didn't rebel in the way Mariah did. Instead, she did something even more dangerous to a system built on control. She stayed calm. She stayed kind. She stayed faithful. But this time, to herself. And that's the real reckoning. The girl who once believed silence was safety now uses her voice as her faith in motion. The one who prayed for unity learned that unity without truth isn't love, it's illusion. And as Kim's authority continues to crack under the weight of her children's independence, Lydia's quiet revolution stands as proof that you can honor where you came from without surrendering who you are. The courtroom has gone silent now, not because the case is over, but because the verdict is clear. Lydia Plath, once the family's peacekeeper, now its quiet revolutionary, has reclaimed her power. And this time, she's not giving it back. When Lydia Plath finally spoke her truth, it wasn't just a moment, it was a fault line splitting through the entire Plath family. Her calm declaration of independence, her insistence that faith could exist without control, sent quiet shockwaves through every corner of a family already teetering on emotional collapse. For years, each sibling had built their own fragile version of freedom. But Lydia's choice, measured, faithful, and public, forced everyone to confront something they'd long avoided. Nothing could ever go back to how it was. The first to react, of course, was Mariah. For years, Mariah has carried the title of the rebel, the one who ran headfirst into everything the family said was forbidden. Music, fashion, freedom, and pain. Her rebellion was loud, messy, raw. But when Lydia spoke out, something in Mariah's tone softened. On social media, she posted a short message. "Proud of you, sis. Speaking truth with love takes more courage than shouting ever could." That post said more than 1,000 interviews could. Because for Mariah, Lydia's quiet defiance validated her own chaotic journey. Mariah had fought with fire, Lydia with grace. Both sought the same thing: autonomy. But where Mariah's fight was dismissed as emotional instability, Lydia's calm reasoning pierced the family's narrative from within. It was the proof Mariah had always needed, that the problem wasn't rebellion. It was repression. Behind that simple post, though, there was another layer, a kind of unspoken apology. For years, Mariah had resented Lydia's loyalty to Kim, accusing her of enabling control. But now, watching Lydia find her voice, Mariah could finally see what silence had cost her sister. And in that recognition, the sisters found something neither of them had felt in years: mutual understanding. Then there's Ethan, the oldest, the one who tried hardest to build a life outside the family while still carrying its ghosts. Lydia's words hit him differently. For Ethan, every mention of faith and family was tangled with the scars of his marriage to Olivia. His journey away from the Plaths had been defined by bitterness and confusion, not clarity. When Lydia made her statement, Ethan stayed quiet at first. No posts, no comments. Just silence, the kind that isn't peace, but processing. Insiders close to the family noted that he was deeply moved by Lydia's calmness, even though he didn't publicly align himself with her. And that makes sense. Ethan has always struggled to separate Kim's control from God's teachings. Lydia's redefinition of faith forced him to look at the parts of himself he'd avoided, the believer who still wanted to hold on to hope, even after everything. But Olivia? Her reaction was different. For Olivia, Lydia's statement was layered with tension. She's long been at odds with the Plath family, accused of influencing Ethan's distance and challenging the values they were raised with. Lydia's new message, faith as freedom, love without control, should have been common ground. But to Olivia, it may have felt too late. Too much damage had been done, too many battles fought. Still, when fans asked her directly about Lydia's recent comments, Olivia replied carefully, "I'm happy she's finding her voice. Everyone deserves to define faith for themselves." It was a diplomatic answer, but you could feel the subtext. Olivia respected Lydia's courage, but she also knew how deep the family wounds ran. Micah, meanwhile, responded in the only way he knows how: by living his truth. The model, the traveller, the free spirit. Micah had already broken away from the family's web years earlier, carving a life of independence in Los Angeles. But even from afar, Lydia's moment reached him. On a podcast, he said, "I think she's brave. It's easy to walk away. It's a lot harder to stay and speak." That line resonated deeply, because that's what Lydia did. She stayed. She spoke from within. And Micah, the brother who once walked away to save himself, seemed to recognize the weight of that choice. Among the younger siblings, the response was quieter. They've grown up watching their family fracture in real time. For them, Lydia has always been the moral compass, the sister who stayed grounded in faith. Seeing her assert independence while still holding to belief created confusion, but also hope. For the first time, they saw that faith didn't have to mean submission. And then there's Kim and Barry. Kim, faced with a daughter who now mirrors her authority, but with empathy instead of ego, appears shaken. On the surface, she's tried to maintain composure, framing Lydia's independence as a sign of maturity. But anyone who's watched Kim long enough knows her smiles are masks for control slipping through her fingers. Barry, on the other hand, looks adrift. In earlier seasons, he was the quiet stabilizer, echoing Kim's vision without fully enforcing it. But now his authority feels hollow. The children who once obeyed him out of duty now move on their own terms. Lydia's statement didn't just mark her transformation, it marked the final erosion of Barry's role as head of the household. What Lydia's revelation did, perhaps more than anything, was destroy the illusion that the Plath family still shared one belief system. For years, their identity depended on unity, a collective "we believe, we obey, we serve." But now that "we" has splintered into "I," Mariah believes in freedom, Ethan believes in distance, Olivia believes in healing, Micah believes in individuality, and Lydia believes in grace. The Plath family isn't united anymore. They're a constellation of survivors orbiting the same past but no longer bound by it. And yet, Lydia's courage might be the quiet thread connecting them again, not through control, but through honesty. Her truth gave permission for everyone else to stop pretending. For the first time, the family's story isn't one narrative told by Kim. It's many voices, finally unfiltered. In the end, Lydia's calm defiance didn't just change her story, it rewrote the family's legacy, because once truth is spoken out loud, it can't be taken back. The silence that once kept them safe now feels like a lie. And maybe that's the real power of this moment. Lydia didn't destroy the family. She simply revealed what was already broken. And in doing so, she gave them something new to stand on: truth. The Plaths can't go back. Not to the old rules, not to the quiet obedience, not to the illusion of unity. The ripple Lydia created isn't ending. It's spreading. And the question now isn't how they'll repair what's lost. It's whether they'll finally learn to live, honestly, with what remains. There's something about honesty that can feel both terrifying and freeing at the same time. When you've spent years walking on eggshells, when silence has been your survival strategy, telling the truth feels like stepping into open air after living underground. That's what we witnessed with Lydia Plath. Her calmness wasn't just maturity, it was liberation. And for a family built on silence, that was the most dangerous kind of freedom. Hi friends, it's Sophie again, from Sister Wives Chapter and Reality Scandals Daily. If you've stayed with me through this breakdown, thank you. This story matters because it's not just about reality TV, it's about something real that so many of us understand. Maybe you've lived it too. Maybe you've been the quiet one, the one who kept peace at any cost, who thought staying silent would protect everyone else. But at some point, silence starts to feel like suffocation. And the moment you finally speak, even softly, you realize how much power your truth really holds. That's what makes Lydia's journey so powerful. She didn't rebel to destroy her family. She spoke to free herself, and maybe in her own way, to free them too. For years, the Plaths' identity depended on image and obedience. Everything looked perfect from the outside: faith, unity, order. But underneath it all was fear. Fear of shame. Fear of being seen as imperfect. Fear of losing control. When Lydia stood up and said she would live her faith on her own terms, she didn't just break a rule, she broke the illusion that love and control could coexist. That's something so many of us can relate to. The moment you realize love doesn't mean obedience, that you can honor where you came from while still choosing who you want to be. And it's emotional, isn't it? Watching someone like Lydia, who never shouted, never rebelled, never tried to fight, finally claim her voice and hold her ground. She didn't need to run away or raise her tone. Her peace was her rebellion. Her truth was her defense. The beauty of that moment isn't just in Lydia's freedom. It's in what it showed everyone else. Kim, Barry, the siblings, the viewers. The truth was never hidden. It was just unspoken. Lydia didn't expose secrets. She named what everyone already felt, but was too afraid to say. That control had replaced connection. That gossip had replaced love. That silence had replaced trust. Now that she's spoken, the question isn't whether the Plaths can go back, it's whether they can finally move forward as individuals, not characters in a story they didn't write. And that's something worth thinking about for all of us. How many times have we played a role to keep the peace? How many times have we chosen silence over truth just to keep a family or relationship from falling apart? If you've ever been in that position, I want to hear from you. Share your story in the comments, because your voice matters too. These shows might be about famous families, but the emotions behind them are universal. Thank you so much for watching and for being part of this community. Don't forget to subscribe to Sister Wives Chapter and Reality Scandals Daily for more real, honest commentary. Your support helps me keep these conversations going, and honestly, these are the ones that need to be had. Lydia's voice didn't just free her, it exposed the truth everyone else had been whispering around for years. And once that truth was spoken, it couldn't be silenced again. Because in the end, freedom doesn't come from running away. It comes from standing still and saying, "This is who I am." And that's exactly what she did.